The clinking of fine crystal glasses echoed loudly through the grand dining room of my own home. I sat quietly at the far end of the long mahogany table, watching the sickening spectacle unfold. My son-in-law Andre stood triumphantly at the head of the table. He was holding a tall glass of imported champagne. He wore a brand new custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first truck. The bright light from the chandelier caught the heavy gold watch resting on his wrist. It was a flashy watch, a watch he had purchased just yesterday morning. He raised his glass high into the air, and the loud, obnoxious chatter of his friends finally died down. "We did it, baby," he shouted, looking directly across the table at my daughter Kendra. $95 million, he laughed, slamming his free hand down hard on the wood. The entire room erupted in wild cheers, but I did not smile. I just watched him. I built this massive house in Atlanta with my bare hands over 30 years ago. I poured the heavy concrete foundation, and I framed every single wall with sweat and aching muscles. But tonight, in this very moment, I felt like an unwanted stranger trapped in a room full of greedy ghosts. Andre cleared his throat loudly, and the dining room went completely quiet again. He slowly turned his dark eyes to me, and the fake, joyful smile dropped instantly from his face. His gaze was incredibly cold, and it was sharp, just like a razor. "Now that we have finally arrived," he said loudly, making sure every guest could hear, "we need to make some serious changes around here." I kept my rough, calloused hands folded tightly in my lap, and I simply waited. "This old house," Andre continued, sweeping his arrogant arm across the room, "is way too old for us now. The plumbing is a disaster, the wiring is a complete joke, and it just does not fit our new billionaire lifestyle." His loud, obnoxious friends murmured in agreement, sipping their expensive stolen drinks. I looked desperately at Kendra, hoping for some support, but she kept her eyes glued firmly to her expensive china plate. Andre took a deliberate step toward me, his chest puffed out with unearned, arrogant pride. "So, Marcus," he said, his voice dripping with pure disrespect, "it is time for you to pack your bags." I felt a cold, tight knot form deep in my chest. "Pack my bags?" I asked quietly. "That is right, old man," Andre sneered, leaning closer to my face. "We won the lottery, and this house is mine now. You are 72 years old, and you are just taking up valuable space. We are moving on up in the world, and you are just dragging us down." The profound disrespect hung in the warm air, heavy and thick. A few of his friends snickered, whispering cruelty behind their hands. I looked slowly around the room at the expensive catered food and the top-shelf bottles of liquor that I certainly did not buy. Andre had been living right here under my roof, completely rent-free for 5 long, miserable years. He ate the food I bought, he slept in the beautiful guest room I built, and he complained bitterly about every single thing I did. Now, with a tiny piece of winning paper in his pocket, he thought he was an untouchable king. "You have exactly until tomorrow morning," Andre demanded, pointing a threatening finger right at my face. "Get your worthless junk together and get the hell out of my property." I did not raise my voice, and I did not shed a single tear. I just stared quietly at the weak man who had corrupted my only child, waiting for his next mistake. Andre took another sip of his expensive champagne, swirling it around like he owned the entire world. He paced slowly back and forth across the hardwood floor that I had sanded and stained with my own hands. "Look at you, Marcus." Andre sneered, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You have worked your entire life for the city, breaking your back for absolute pennies. And what do you have to show for it?" he asked, gesturing wildly at my faded flannel shirt and my worn-out jeans. "You are a broke, tired old man living in the past, and you have absolutely nothing to offer us anymore." The room was dead quiet except for the clinking of ice and glasses as his friends watched the cruel show. Andre pulled a thick silver money clip from his tailored pocket, flashing a stack of crisp $100 bills. This is what real power looks like, he bragged, tossing a single bill onto the table right in front of me. Maybe you can use that to buy a bus ticket out of my city. He laughed loudly, and a few of his friends joined in the cruel chorus. You spent 30 years building bridges and roads for other people to drive on, but you never went anywhere yourself. You are a complete failure, Marcus, and your entire life has been utterly worthless. I did not touch the money, and I did not flinch at his incredibly harsh words. I slowly turned my head, looking down the long table at my daughter Kendra. My beautiful little girl, the one I had raised after her mother passed away, was sitting right there. I waited for her to say something to defend the man who had given her everything. I waited for her to tell her arrogant husband to show some damn respect in her father's house. But Kendra just sat there frozen in complete silence. She picked up her crystal fork, and she carefully moved a piece of roasted asparagus around her expensive plate. She did not look up, and she did not meet my eyes. Her silence was louder than any insult Andre could ever throw at me. It was a deep, crushing betrayal cutting right to the bone, but I refused to let them see me bleed. Andre noticed my gaze, and he chuckled darkly, stepping behind Kendra and resting his heavy hands firmly on her shoulders. Do not look at her for help, old man, Andre commanded, squeezing her shoulders tightly. She knows I am right, and she knows we deserve so much better than this depressing, outdated dump. We are going to buy a massive mansion in Buckhead, and we are going to travel to places you cannot even pronounce. We are done playing the role of the grateful, struggling family. We are filthy rich now, and you are just a massive burden. Kendra finally raised her head just an inch, and she opened her mouth slightly. For a brief second I thought she might speak, but Andre squeezed her shoulder again, and she quickly closed it. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water, entirely enabling the terrible abuse with her cowardly silence. The man I had let into my home was brutally tearing down my entire life, and my only child was letting him do it. Andre was not finished with his pathetic performance. He walked over to the large fireplace, pointing at the family photos resting on the wooden mantel. Look at all this ancient history, he mocked, picking up a silver frame. It was a picture of Kendra when she was 10 years old, standing with me in the front yard. You cling to these memories because your future is completely empty, Andre said carelessly, tossing the frame back onto the shelf. It landed hard, the delicate glass cracking straight down the middle. Kendra jumped slightly at the sharp sound, but she immediately lowered her head again. She was a silent partner in his terrible cruelty. Andre walked back to the table, pouring himself another overflowing glass of expensive champagne. You need to understand, Marcus, that the world belongs to winners, he declared, proudly raising the glass again. And you are just a sad, tired loser. You let us live here because you were lonely and pathetic, and you needed us to make you feel important. Well, we do not need you anymore. The cruelty in his voice was absolutely suffocating. He wanted to break my spirit completely in front of his audience to prove his newfound dominance. He wanted me to beg, to plead for a tiny room in his imaginary new mansion. But I'm an old builder, and I know exactly how to weather a violent storm. I looked at the cracked picture frame resting on the mantel, and I looked at my silent daughter shrinking in her chair. The insult was complete, and the final line had been crossed. The boy had spoken his mind, and he had revealed the rotten core of his character. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing to make my final move in this miserable room. I slowly pushed my heavy wooden chair back from the long dining table. The loud, scraping sound cut sharply through the room, and every single eye locked onto me. Andre stood tall at the head of the table with a smug grin spreading across his face. He was fully expecting me to break down and cry, or to beg for mercy in front of his cruel friends. He wanted a fight to prove his dominance, but I am an old builder, and I do not waste my energy swinging a hammer at rotten wood. I stood up straight, and I looked Andre right in the eye. I did not say a single word. I did not need to. I just stared at him, observing the massive structural weakness in his arrogant posture. He was a weak man, building a fragile castle on a foundation of pure sand. He had a tiny slip of paper and he suddenly thought he was a god. But a real man knows that wealth is not just handed to you on a Tuesday afternoon. "Are you deaf?" Old man Andre shouted, taking a heavy step forward. "I told you to pack your trash and get out of my house." I turned my back to him, entirely dismissing his existence. The sheer disrespect of my silence infuriated him more than any insult I could have thrown. I heard him curse loudly under his breath, slamming his expensive champagne glass down on the table. I walked slowly and deliberately out of the dining room and down the long hallway. I could hear his friends nervously whispering behind me, but I kept my eyes focused straight ahead. I walked into my bedroom, the room I had shared with my late wife for almost 30 years. It was quiet in here, a safe sanctuary, away from the toxic greed infecting my home. I walked over to the closet, and I pulled out a small leather overnight bag. I did not pack much. I grabbed 3 clean shirts, a comfortable pair of jeans, and my heavy work boots. I'm a simple man, and I do not need a lot to survive a storm. I walked into the bathroom, grabbing my toothbrush and my daily blood pressure medication. I looked at my tired reflection in the mirror, taking a deep breath. My own daughter, the child I had protected for her entire life, had just sat there and let a parasite throw me out onto the street. The ultimate betrayal settled heavily in my chest, a deep and painful ache. But I'm not a victim, and I refuse to play the role of the helpless old prey. I zipped up the small leather bag, and I grabbed my heavy winter coat off the hook. I took one final look around the quiet bedroom, taking in the framed pictures and the solid oak furniture I'd built with my own 2 hands. I was leaving my physical house, but I was not leaving my true foundation. As I walked back down the hallway, the leather bag hanging heavy from my shoulder, I saw Kendra. She was standing near the kitchen entrance, wringing her hands nervously. Her expensive dress looked out of place against the guilty expression painted on her face. She took a tiny step toward me, opening her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I stopped walking and I looked directly at my daughter. I saw the deep fear in her eyes, the pathetic weakness that kept her chained to a monster. I did not feel anger toward her in that exact moment. I only felt a profound, heavy pity. "You made your choice, Kendra," I said quietly, my voice completely calm. "You chose the money, and you chose him. Dad, please," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. "Do not make this harder than it has to be. Just go to a hotel for a few days and let him calm down. I am not a dog to be chained outside," I replied, adjusting the strap of my bag. "I built this home to protect you, but I cannot protect you from your own greed." I walked past her, leaving her standing alone in the cold hallway. Andre was waiting for me in the large entryway, leaning arrogantly against the front door. He had a triumphant smirk plastered on his face, watching me approach with my small bag. "Look at the big, tough man running away with his tail between his legs." Andre laughed, blocking the exit. "I told you, Marcus, you are nothing but a massive failure. You are leaving your own house, and you have absolutely nothing to your name." I stopped a few feet in front of him. "Move aside, Andre," I said quietly, my voice low and steady. He puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. "And what if I do not?" he sneered. "What are you going to do about it, you broke old loser?" I looked past his shoulder out the small window of the heavy front door. The cool Atlanta night was waiting for me. I looked back at Andre, studying his greedy, desperate eyes. He was so completely blind to the massive collapse waiting just around the corner. I said, "Move." I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Andre hesitated for a second, sensing the absolute resolve in my tone. He slowly stepped aside, opening the heavy front door with a mocking bow. "Do not ever come back here," he spat as I walked past him out onto the front porch. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind me with a loud, final thud. I stood on the large concrete front porch of the house I built. The cool, crisp Atlanta air filled my tired lungs, and the loud, obnoxious music from the dining room was instantly muffled. I walked slowly down the long brick driveway, feeling the solid ground beneath my heavy work boots. I did not look back at the bright windows or the expensive cars parked on my grass. I reached the end of the driveway, stopping under the bright yellow glow of the street lamp. I reached deep into the inside pocket of my heavy winter coat. My rough fingers brushed against a small folded piece of paper. I pulled it out, holding it up to the harsh street light. It was not a bus ticket, and it was not a plea for help. It was the original time-stamped purchase receipt from the corner store attached directly to the actual winning lottery ticket. Andre was inside my house drinking expensive champagne and celebrating a $95 million victory that did not belong to him. He thought he had the winning ticket, but he only had a worthless copy or a ticket I legally purchased under my own name. The exact details of his foolish mistake did not matter to me right now. What mattered was the absolute undeniable proof of ownership resting quietly in the palm of my hand. I carefully folded the precious paper and I tucked it safely back into my coat pocket. I reached into my other pocket and I pulled out my cell phone. I scrolled past the useless everyday numbers and I stopped on a single name. Maya. She was not a public defender or a cheap strip mall attorney. Maya was a ruthless, high-powered corporate lawyer operating out of a massive glass tower in downtown Atlanta. She destroyed arrogant men for a living. I pressed the call button and I lifted the phone to my ear. It rang twice before she answered. "Marcus," she said, her voice crisp and completely awake despite the late hour. "Tell me you are not calling about another permit delay with the city." "No, Maya," I said, my voice low and steady in the night air. "I have a much bigger problem tonight. My son-in-law just kicked me out of my own home." There was a brief, sharp silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the subtle, dangerous shift in her breathing. "Excuse me," she asked, her tone instantly dropping into a cold professional strike mode. "Did he touch you, Marcus?" "No," I replied, watching a car drive slowly past my street corner. "But he believes he just won $95 million in the state lottery. He's throwing a massive party right now in my dining room. He told me to pack my bags and die in the street." Maya let out a short, dry laugh entirely devoid of any humor. "And let me guess," she said, "you are the one who actually bought the ticket." "I am holding the official purchase receipt and the winning ticket right now," I said, leaning against the cold metal pole of the street lamp. "I bought 2 tickets in a single transaction." "He thinks he holds the power, but he is standing on my concrete foundation. I need you to listen to me carefully, Marcus." Maya commanded, the sound of her rapid typing echoing softly through the phone speaker. "Where are you right now?" "I am standing on the sidewalk outside my property," I answered. "I have my bag and I am leaving the premises peacefully." "Good," she said, her voice dripping with calculated venom. "Let him celebrate tonight. Let him drink his expensive champagne and let him make his foolish plans. Do not engage with him and do not answer any calls from your daughter." "What is our first move?" I asked, watching the dark, swaying branches of the old oak tree in my front yard. "I'm filing an emergency legal injunction with the State Lottery Commission first thing tomorrow morning," Maya stated fiercely. "I will order an immediate total freeze on that specific payout. If he tries to claim a single dime, the state will flag him for criminal fraud." "Do it," I said, feeling a quiet, dangerous calm settle over my racing heart. "I want every single door slammed directly in his face." "Consider the money locked and fully secured," she replied smoothly. "Meet me at my office in Buckhead at exactly 9 in the morning. Bring the receipt, bring the ticket, and bring your absolute worst intentions, Marcus. We are going to bury this arrogant boy. I will be there," I said, and I hung up the phone. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. I adjusted the heavy leather strap of my overnight bag across my broad shoulder. I took one last long look at the beautiful house I had built for my family. The bright lights were still blazing, and the ignorant, greedy fools inside were dancing on a grave that was completely empty. I turned my back to the false celebration, and I walked slowly down the dark, quiet street, disappearing into the cold Atlanta night. The bright Atlanta sun pierced right through the expensive silk curtains of the master bedroom. Andre woke up with a massive headache, but a huge, arrogant grin was plastered firmly across his face. He rolled over heavily, ignoring Kendra, who was still fast asleep in the tangled sheets. Today was the very first day of his new billionaire life, and he was absolutely going to buy his crown. He threw on a flashy designer jacket, grabbed his thick leather wallet, and walked proudly out the front door, stepping carelessly over the empty champagne bottles scattered all over the beautiful hardwood floors. He drove his leased sports car, speeding aggressively through the morning traffic, straight to the most exclusive luxury car dealership in the wealthy district of Buckhead. He parked recklessly right in front of the massive glass display doors, stepping out of the vehicle like he owned the entire city block. A sharply dressed salesman with slick dark hair walked over immediately to greet him. "Welcome to Bentley of Atlanta, sir," the salesman said politely, sizing up Andre in his expensive designer clothes. "How can I assist you today on this beautiful morning? I'm not just looking around today," Andre bragged loudly, making sure the other wealthy customers could hear his booming voice. "I want the custom Continental sitting right there on the pristine showroom floor, and I am paying full retail price right now." The salesman smiled widely, clearly smelling a massive, life-changing commission. "That is an excellent choice, sir," he replied smoothly, leading Andre toward the sleek black vehicle. "That specific model is fully loaded with custom features, and it retails for over $250,000. "Wrap it up," Andre commanded, pulling out his heavy platinum credit card and waving it around. "I just hit the state lottery last night for $95 million, so money is absolutely no object to me anymore." The salesman chuckled politely, taking the platinum card with both of his hands. "Right this way, Mr. Blake. We will process the initial down payment and get the official paperwork started for you." Andre sat back confidently in a plush leather office chair, crossing his legs arrogantly. He eagerly imagined pulling up to his broke friends in the massive, powerful machine, watching them beg for a ride. The salesman typed quickly into his sleek computer, and he swiped the heavy metal card right through the processing machine. The small machine beeped, letting out a sharp, angry electronic sound. The salesman frowned slightly, looking closely at the glowing screen. "It seems there is a small issue with the card, sir," the salesman said, nervously tapping the machine. "It is coming back as completely declined." Andre rolled his eyes, sighing loudly and leaning forward. "Run it again," he demanded, waving his hand dismissively at the screen. "It is a premium platinum card with a $50,000 limit. Your machine is probably just broken." The salesman swiped the heavy card again, but the angry red light flashed instantly for a second time. "I'm very sorry, sir, but your bank is flatly refusing the charge." The salesman explained, his polite, welcoming tone dropping slightly. "Do you happen to have another form of payment we can try today?" Andre felt a hot flush of embarrassment creeping slowly up his neck. The other wealthy customers sitting in the quiet lounge were starting to stare at him. He quickly pulled out a second card, a bright gold one, and slammed it hard on the glass desk. "Use that one," he snapped angrily, his patience wearing dangerously thin. The salesman swiped the gold card, but the machine beeped violently once more. "Declined again," the salesman said, pushing both cards directly back across the desk. "Sir, unless you can contact your financial institution right now, I must ask you to step aside so I can help the actual buyers waiting in the lobby." "Do you have any idea who I am?" Andre shouted, standing up quickly and pointing a furious finger at the man. "I am a multi-millionaire, and I will have your job by tomorrow for this extreme disrespect." The dealership general manager, a tall man with a very stern face, walked over quickly from his private office. "Is there a serious problem out here?" the manager asked, crossing his arms firmly over his chest. Your little machine is a piece of trash, Andre yelled, snatching his worthless credit cards off the desk. I'm taking my $95 million somewhere else today. He stormed out of the quiet dealership, his face burning hot with absolute crushing humiliation. He climbed back into his leased car, gripping the leather steering wheel with tight white knuckles. This was just a stupid, temporary bank error, he aggressively told himself, trying to calm his racing heart. The massive lottery money was completely real. He just needed to go to the state office and officially claim his grand prize right now. He pulled out wildly into traffic, speeding dangerously down the busy Atlanta highway, heading straight for the Georgia Lottery Commission headquarters. He parked illegally in a loading zone running heavily up the wide concrete steps of the imposing government building. He pushed aggressively through the heavy glass doors, marching confidently straight up to the main reception desk. A large security guard and a stern-looking female clerk watched him approach the counter. I'm here to claim the grand prize, Andre announced, proudly pulling the printed lottery numbers from his designer pocket. $95 million, and my name is Andre Blake. The clerk typed his name and the specific ticket number slowly into her keyboard. She stared intently at the computer screen for a very long time, her expression remaining completely blank. She slowly looked up at Andre, and then she looked over at the armed security guard standing nearby. I am very sorry, Mr. Blake, the clerk said coldly, folding her hands together, but you absolutely cannot claim this prize today. What do you mean I cannot claim it? Andre demanded loudly, slamming his flat hand hard on the wooden counter. The numbers match perfectly. I have the ticket right here. I am the sole winner. The clerk turned the monitor, slightly pointing a pen at a massive, flashing red alert taking up the entire screen. The entire payout for this specific ticket number has been completely frozen by a severe legal injunction, she explained sharply. A senior corporate attorney filed an emergency federal block at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, citing a total ownership dispute and potential criminal fraud. Criminal fraud? Andre stammered, his confident, arrogant posture completely collapsing in on itself. That is totally impossible. That is my winning ticket. The financial system is totally locked, Mr. Blake, the clerk stated with absolute terrifying finality. We cannot process a single dime for you, and if you attempt to force a false claim, we are legally required to contact the state police immediately. I highly suggest you leave this building right now. Andre sped away from the state lottery commission, his heart pounding violently against his ribcage. The terrifying drive back to the house felt like a suffocating, inescapable nightmare. He swerved recklessly into the long brick driveway, slamming the heavy brakes and throwing the leased sports car violently into park. He burst through the heavy front oak door, breathing heavily, like a desperate cornered animal. The massive house was completely quiet, and the lingering, stale smell of expensive champagne made him physically sick to his stomach. Kendra was sitting in the large, spotless kitchen, slowly sipping a hot cup of coffee, completely oblivious to the approaching disaster. What is wrong with you? She asked, looking closely at his pale, sweating face. Everything is wrong. Andre screamed, his loud voice cracking with pure, unfiltered panic. Your pathetic father completely ruined us today. Kendra stood up quickly, her dark coffee spilling slightly over the rim of her favorite mug and splashing onto the polished granite counter. What did my father do? She demanded, her voice rising sharply with sudden defensive anger. He blocked the money, Andre yelled, pacing frantically around the massive kitchen island, his hands pulling aggressively at his own hair. He called a high-powered corporate lawyer and they put a massive federal freeze on the entire $95 million. The state will not give me a single dime today. Kendra stared at him, her brown eyes wide with sudden, absolute terror. But you promised me the ticket was ours, she whispered, her voice trembling in the quiet room. You stood in front of all our friends, and you said he gave it to me as a permanent gift. It does not matter what he said, Andre snapped cruelly, running his shaking, sweaty hands over his face. He has the original purchase receipt and he locked us out completely and totally. The harsh, unforgiving reality crashed heavily into the warm kitchen. Kendra looked slowly at the empty, expensive liquor bottles left over from their extravagant, foolish party, and a cold, terrible dread washed entirely over her. "We spent an absolute fortune last night," she said quietly, her chest tightening with fear. "How are we going to pay for the luxury catering and the imported alcohol and the private bartender? We will just put it on the premium credit cards." Andre lied quickly, his dark eyes darting nervously away from her intense, questioning gaze. "My personal cards are completely maxed out," Kendra argued, her voice breaking into a frightened sob. "And you specifically told me yesterday that we had plenty of liquid cash to easily cover everything. Just shut up and let me think for a minute," Andre barked, completely losing his fragile temper. At that exact miserable moment, the heavy brass mail slot on the front door clattered loudly. The local neighborhood mail carrier had just dropped off the daily afternoon delivery. Andre ignored the sharp sound, entirely consumed by his own panic. But Kendra walked slowly into the long hallway, bending down to pick up the thick, heavy stack of envelopes resting on the beautiful hardwood floor. She flipped slowly through the daily mail, and her face went completely white as a ghost. Most of the thick envelopes had bright red warning borders and urgent collection stamps printed boldly across the front. "Andre, what is all of this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a terrified, breathless whisper. He stormed heavily into the hallway, trying to snatch the massive stack of mail right out of her trembling hands. "Give me that trash," he demanded, but Kendra quickly stepped back, ripping open the very top envelope. "It is a final legal notice from the luxury car leasing company," she read aloud, her hands shaking violently as her eyes scanned the harsh words. "You are 3 full months behind on the monthly payments. They are legally coming to repossess the car by the end of this week." "It is just a stupid clerical error," Andre lied again, his voice pitching much higher with sheer pathetic desperation. She ignored his obvious lie and she ripped open another thick envelope, letting the shredded, useless paper fall carelessly to the floor. "And this is a final critical warning from the premium credit card company," she cried out, tears welling up in her eyes. "We currently owe $40,000 and the entire account has been completely suspended and sent to collections." Kendra looked up at him, her eyes completely filled with tears of absolute crushing betrayal. "You looked me in the eye and you told me you paid these bills," she screamed, throwing the heavy, terrifying stack of mail directly at his chest. "You told me my father was the one dragging us down, but you are completely drowning us in massive, inescapable debt." "I had it all perfectly under control," Andre shouted back, pointing an angry, shaking finger right at her tear-stained face. "The lottery money was supposed to fix absolutely everything today. We were supposed to be billionaires, and your selfish, bitter father stole our entire future from us. He did not steal anything," Kendra cried, completely breaking down and burying her face in her shaking hands. "He bought that specific ticket, and you threw him out onto the cold street exactly like a stray dog. What are we going to do, Andre?" she sobbed, sliding slowly down the wall until she was sitting on the floor. "We have absolutely nothing left to our name." The massive golden illusion of extreme wealth had completely shattered into a million pieces, leaving them trapped in a terrifying cold reality. Andre looked down at the bright red past due notices scattered all over the beautiful floor that his father-in-law had built from scratch. The crushing, suffocating weight of his massive debt was finally catching up to him, and the first major cracks in his marriage were splitting wide open. While Andre was drowning in his own foolish mess, I was stepping out of a yellow cab into the bright morning sun of downtown Buckhead. The towering glass skyscraper stretched high up into the clear blue sky, casting a long, cold shadow over the busy street below. I walked through the massive revolving doors wearing my simple flannel shirt and my heavy work boots. The wealthy businessmen in their sharp, tailored suits completely ignored me, but I did not care. I was not there to impress them. I was there to build a heavy, unbreakable fortress. I took the high-speed elevator all the way up to the 50th floor. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing a massive, quiet reception area, entirely paved in imported white marble. A young receptionist sitting behind a sleek mahogany desk looked up with a polite professional smile. "Good morning, sir," she said warmly. "How can I direct you today?" "I'm here to see Maya," I replied smoothly. "Tell her Marcus has arrived." Her eyes widened slightly, recognizing the name, and she immediately stood up, gesturing toward a set of heavy frosted glass doors. She led me down a long, quiet hallway lined with massive abstract paintings and expensive leather chairs. Maya was standing behind her enormous desk, looking out over the sprawling Atlanta skyline through a wall of pure, transparent glass. She was a fierce, brilliant woman wearing a dark, tailored power suit that commanded absolute respect in any courtroom. When she turned around to face me, her sharp, dark eyes were completely alive with the thrill of the hunt. "Marcus," she said firmly, walking around the large desk to shake my calloused hand. "Have a seat, my friend." I sat down heavily in a plush leather armchair, letting out a long, tired sigh. The view from her office was absolutely incredible, showing the entire city spread out like a tiny toy model. This right here is the very top of the food chain, and Maya was a master predator. "I filed the emergency federal injunction exactly at 8 this morning," Maya stated confidently, opening a thick manila folder and spreading crisp legal documents all over her desk. "The State Lottery Commission has completely frozen the $95 million payout. Andre cannot touch a single penny, and his name has been officially flagged in their central database." I nodded slowly, feeling a deep, solid satisfaction settling in my chest. "He threw a massive party last night," I said quietly, leaning back in the comfortable chair. "He kicked me out and told me to die in the street because he thought he was a billionaire." Maya smiled, a very cold, calculating smile that did not reach her eyes. "Well, Marcus," she replied smoothly, "he woke up this morning as a very broke and very terrified man. But the lottery ticket freeze is just our opening move. I did not just stop at securing your rightful winnings. When you called me last night, I put my entire forensic accounting team to work on his background." I leaned forward slightly, resting my rough hands on my knees. "What exactly did you find, Maya?" I asked, knowing she never wasted her time on small details. She pulled a detailed financial printout from the thick stack of papers, sliding it directly across the smooth desk toward me. "Andre is not just an arrogant fool, Marcus," she explained, her voice dropping to a serious, lethal tone. "He is a desperate drowning rat. He has absolutely no liquid assets, and his personal bank accounts are completely overdrawn. But that is not even the worst part." I looked down at the highlighted numbers running down the crisp white page. The red ink was absolutely everywhere. "I am an old builder, and I know exactly what a collapsed foundation looks like. He owes money," I stated simply, looking back up at her sharp face. "He owes a massive amount of money," Maya corrected, firmly tapping her manicured finger on the bottom line. "Over $300,000, Marcus. And he does not owe it to a friendly neighborhood bank. He's been placing huge, reckless bets with some very dangerous underground gambling rings operating right here in the city." The cold reality of the situation clicked perfectly into place in my mind. That is exactly why he wanted to kick me out so badly, I realized, shaking my head in total disgust. He was not just trying to humiliate me. He wanted to claim total ownership of my house so he could quickly sell my property and pay off his massive street debt. Maya nodded sharply, gathering the forensic documents back into a neat pile. "He was planning to steal your entire life savings and flip your property to save his own miserable skin," she confirmed bluntly. "He used the lottery ticket as a desperate excuse to finally pull the trigger on his disgusting plan. But he made a fatal error, Marcus. He attacked a man who actually built his own armor." "So what is our next move?" I asked, feeling the righteous anger burning quietly in my veins. "We are going to lock down your entire estate," Maya declared, her eyes flashing with absolute legal authority. We are placing your house, your savings, and the lottery ticket into an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust. By the time I am finished with him, he will not be able to touch a single blade of grass on your front lawn. We are going to sit back and let his angry creditors squeeze him completely dry. While I was sitting securely in a high-rise glass tower building a permanent legal fortress, my son-in-law was rapidly running out of time. Andre was still standing in the middle of my beautiful kitchen, listening to his wife cry over a massive pile of unpaid bills. The suffocating walls of his own lies were closing in on him fast. He could not stand the sound of Kendra sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, so he did what cowards always do. He decided to run away from his own miserable mess. He grabbed his expensive leather jacket, and he stormed angrily out the front door, slamming it violently behind him. He marched heavily down the front steps, pulling the electronic key fob out of his designer pocket. He wanted to drive his flashy, leased sports car far away from the screaming and the crying and the terrifying reality of his empty bank accounts. But reality was already waiting for him, parked directly at the end of my long brick driveway. A massive, beat-up tow truck with bright yellow flashing lights was idling loudly in the quiet, peaceful street. Two very large, incredibly serious men wearing dirty, heavy work boots and dark sunglasses were already out of the truck. One of the large men was aggressively unrolling a heavy steel chain, while the other man expertly maneuvered a thick metal hook directly underneath the front bumper of Andre and his expensive sports car. "Hey," Andre screamed at the top of his lungs, sprinting wildly down the green lawn, waving his arms like a madman. "What the hell do you think you're doing to my car? Get your dirty hands off my property right now." The two men did not flinch, and they did not stop working. The man with the heavy steel chain looked up slowly, completely unimpressed by the angry, shouting boy in the expensive suit. "We are not touching your property today," the large man said casually, spitting a dark stream of tobacco onto the clean concrete. "We are legally repossessing this vehicle on behalf of the Luxury Leasing Corporation. Your account is severely delinquent, and this car is officially going back to the lot." "You cannot take my car," Andre shouted frantically, grabbing the cold metal door handle and pulling on it uselessly. The doors were already electronically locked by the repo company. "I am a multi-millionaire," Andre lied desperately, his voice echoing loudly down the quiet, tree-lined street. "I just won $95 million in the state lottery last night. I can easily buy this stupid car and your entire tow truck company right now with straight cash." The second repo man let out a loud, barking laugh, pulling a thick, crumpled legal document from his greasy pocket. "If you are a billionaire, buddy," the man chuckled cruelly, slapping the legal paper hard against the driver's side window, "then you should have paid your bill 3 months ago. You are completely broke and your shiny toy is going away today." The loud commotion was completely shattering the peaceful afternoon. Front doors across the quiet neighborhood began to open slowly. My loyal neighbors, the good people I had lived next to for over 30 years, were stepping out onto their porches. I knew these people well. We had shared summer barbecues and we had watched each other grow old. Now they were all standing on their manicured lawns, watching the arrogant boy who married my daughter get completely destroyed in the middle of the bright street. Andre looked around in absolute freezing panic, seeing the judging eyes of the wealthy neighborhood locking directly onto him. He recognized Desmond, a retired judge, standing on his porch across the street, watching the pathetic scene unfold with total disgust. Andre felt his face burn with a severe, agonizing humiliation. He was being publicly exposed as a complete, undeniable fraud. "Please, just give me one more day," Andre begged pathetically, his arrogant bravado entirely disappearing, instantly replaced by a whining, desperate plea. "Just let me make one phone call and I will get you the cash." The large man ignored his pathetic begging, walking back to the control levers on the side of the loud tow truck. He pulled a heavy, greasy lever, and the loud, hydraulic engine roared violently to life. The heavy steel chains pulled tight, and the front wheels of the expensive leased sports car were lifted entirely off the ground. The beautiful, sleek vehicle dangled helplessly in the air, looking incredibly foolish attached to the back of a dirty, rusty tow truck. "Have a very nice day, Mr. Blake," the repo man mocked, climbing heavily up into the driver's seat and slamming the rusty metal door. The massive truck lurched forward, dragging the expensive symbol of his fake wealth loudly down the street. Andre stood completely frozen in the middle of the empty road, watching his shiny fake empire literally drive away from him. He was completely alone, fully exposed to the harsh daylight, with absolutely nowhere left to hide. Kendra stood completely still behind the sheer curtains of the large living room window. She had watched the entire humiliating scene unfold right on her own front lawn. She saw her husband, the man who had promised her the entire world, screaming helplessly at a dirty tow truck driver. She saw the heavy steel chains lift the expensive sports car straight into the air. And worst of all, she saw the judging, disappointed eyes of her neighbors piercing right through the beautiful glass window. The loud roaring engine of the heavy tow truck slowly faded away down the quiet Atlanta street. Kendra let the thin curtain fall back into place, plunging the quiet living room back into a heavy, suffocating silence. The terrible reality of her own foolish choices was finally catching up to her, and it felt exactly like a heavy stone sitting dead in her chest. She walked slowly back into the large kitchen, her expensive high heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floor. The floor her father had laid down board by board over 30 years ago. She looked down at the bright red collection notices and the final warning letters still scattered violently across the clean granite tiles. Andre had screamed at her, and he had blamed her father for their sudden financial collapse, but the dates printed clearly on the threatening letters were months old. The massive, inescapable debt had been growing in the dark long before the winning lottery ticket ever existed. A sick, terrible feeling of dread washed entirely over her shaking body. She needed to know the absolute truth right now. She needed to see the complete bottom of the deep hole Andre had dug for them. Kendra turned away from the messy kitchen and she walked down the long, quiet hallway. She stopped in front of the large guest bedroom, the room Andre had selfishly claimed as his own private executive office. She pushed the heavy oak door open, stepping into the room. It was perfectly clean and it smelled strongly of expensive cologne and arrogance. A massive, dark, mahogany desk sat squarely in the center of the room, completely cleared of any real honest work. She walked behind the large desk, pulling open the top drawers one by one. They were filled with useless, expensive pens and blank luxury stationery. She moved down to the middle drawers, finding nothing but old luxury car brochures and glossy travel magazines. But when she pulled hard on the very bottom drawer, it did not move. It was locked tight with a heavy brass mechanism. Kendra felt a sudden sharp spike of pure adrenaline. Andre never locked anything in this house unless he was hiding a terrible, dangerous secret. She frantically searched the top of the desk, grabbing a heavy, solid bronze letter opener. She wedged the sharp metal tip right into the tiny gap above the brass lock. She pushed down with all her might, using both of her trembling hands. The thick wood splintered loudly and the brass lock snapped with a sharp, violent crack. She pulled the heavy wooden drawer open, dropping the bent letter opener onto the carpet. The deep drawer was completely empty except for a single thick black leather binder hiding silently in the dark corner. Kendra reached down, her hands shaking uncontrollably, and she pulled the heavy binder out. She placed it carefully on the smooth mahogany desk, taking a deep, ragged breath. She slowly flipped open the thick leather cover, and the absolute terrifying truth stared blindly back at her. The first few pages were standard bank statements from an account Andre had completely hidden from her. The balances were not just empty, they were severely overdrawn by tens of thousands of dollars. But as she flipped deeper into the thick binder, the documents became much darker and incredibly dangerous. She found handwritten ledger sheets covered in messy, aggressive ink. They were detailed records of massive underground sports bets and high-stakes casino markers. She read the terrifying names of dangerous men who operated entirely outside the law. Men who did not send polite red collection letters in the mail. Men who collected their heavy debts with absolute terrifying violence. She stared blindly at the final staggering number circled heavily in thick red ink at the very bottom of the page. $300,000. The cold psychological toll of the massive lie finally broke her completely. Kendra collapsed heavily into the plush leather office chair, the thick binder slipping from her shaking hands and crashing loudly onto the floor. The staggering, undeniable evidence was scattered all around her feet. Her mind raced back to the horrible events of the previous night. She had sat in the beautiful dining room completely silent while Andre humiliated her father. She had watched her own husband mock the calloused hands that had built the very walls protecting her from the cold. She had chosen the loud, empty arrogance of a foolish boy over the quiet, undeniable strength of the man who raised her. "My father was right," she whispered to the empty room, hot tears finally spilling freely down her pale cheeks. "He was right about everything, and I helped a monster throw him out of his own home." The deep, crushing guilt was entirely suffocating. She curled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms tightly around her shaking body. The grand, beautiful house suddenly felt like a massive, terrifying prison. She had traded her absolute loyalty and her own flesh and blood for a fake, fragile crown. And now the heavy, undeniable truth was completely crushing her under the terrifying weight of $300,000 in mob debt. The foundation of her marriage was completely rotten, and it was finally violently collapsing all around her. The heavy tow truck was entirely gone, leaving Andre standing completely alone in the middle of the quiet street. The hot Atlanta sun beat down mercilessly on his sweating face. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with a toxic mix of absolute panic and pure, unfiltered rage. He looked wildly around the beautiful neighborhood, the very neighborhood I'd helped build with my own two bare hands. He saw the judging, silent eyes of the good, honest people who had known me for over 30 years. Directly across the wide street, standing proudly on his perfectly manicured green lawn, was Desmond. Desmond was a retired city judge, a large man of immense respect and absolute unwavering integrity. His wife Sheila, a fierce, elegant woman with a sharp mind and zero tolerance for foolishness, stood right beside him. They had watched the entire pathetic repossession right from their shaded front porch. Andre felt his blood boil with desperate, irrational anger. His fragile, fake ego was completely shattered, and he needed someone to blame for his massive public failure. In his blind, spiraling panic, he convinced himself that I had personally orchestrated this entire humiliation. He thought I was hiding somewhere in the neighborhood, laughing at his total destruction from behind closed doors. He stomped heavily across the hot asphalt, his expensive leather shoes smacking loudly against the hard pavement. He marched directly toward Desmond and Sheila, completely ignoring the basic rules of common human respect. He stopped at the very edge of their green grass, his face twisted into an ugly, desperate snarl. "Where is he?" Andre demanded loudly, pointing a shaking, sweaty finger directly at the older couple. "Where is Marcus hiding right now?" Desmond did not flinch, and he did not step back. He simply adjusted his wire glasses, looking down his nose at Andre, like he was examining a highly annoying, completely insignificant insect. "You're trespassing on my private property, boy," Desmond said, his voice incredibly deep and completely calm. "I highly suggest you turn around and walk your broke self right back across the street. I am not leaving until you tell me where he is." Andre shouted, his voice cracking violently with pathetic, obvious desperation. He called some crooked corporate lawyer and he legally froze my $95 million. You know exactly where he is hiding, and you are going to tell me before I lose my mind. Sheila took a slow, deliberate step forward, resting her hands firmly on her hips. You have an incredible amount of nerve coming onto our land with your loud, disrespectful mouth, she said sharply, her voice cutting through the warm air like a razor blade. We have watched you for 5 long, miserable years. We watched you leech off a good, honest man. We watched you eat his food and sleep under his hard-earned roof without ever lifting a single finger to help him pay a bill. I am multi-millionaire, Andre lied frantically, his face burning a bright, humiliating red. The state lottery is just processing my massive payout today. I am going to buy this entire neighborhood block, and I will personally tear your ugly house down with a massive bulldozer. Desmond let out a loud, booming laugh, a deep sound of pure, unfiltered amusement that echoed clearly down the quiet street. Other neighbors standing quietly on their porches began to chuckle openly, joining in the complete, devastating public humiliation. You are not a millionaire, Desmond declared loudly, making sure every single person on the block could hear the absolute truth. You are a completely broke, incredibly desperate fraud. A real man does not get his shiny leased toy dragged away by a rusty tow truck in the middle of the bright afternoon. A real man does not kick his own father-in-law out into the cold street like a piece of worthless trash. Andre opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. His throat was completely dry. He was entirely outmatched, surrounded by my loyal allies. And he finally knew it. Marcus built the very foundation of this entire community. Desmond continued, his voice echoing with absolute moral authority. He is a man of honor and a man of immense quiet strength. You are just a weak, terrified child throwing a pathetic temper tantrum because your stolen credit cards finally bounced today. Now get off my grass before I call the city police and have you arrested for a public disturbance. The ultimate crushing humiliation finally broke right through his thick, arrogant skull. Andre looked around desperately, seeing the disgusted, mocking faces of the entire neighborhood staring directly at him. He had absolutely no power here, and he had no wealthy friends to back up his loud threats. He slowly lowered his shaking hand, entirely defeated by the undeniable heavy truth. He turned around slowly, his shoulders slumping heavily toward the ground, and he walked away. He looked exactly like a beaten, pathetic guy retreating to the only place he had left to hide. He walked up the long, empty driveway and stepped back into my quiet house, completely unaware that Kendra was waiting inside with the terrifying dark secrets she had just uncovered in his private desk. While that foolish boy was getting completely torn apart on my front lawn, I was sitting quietly in a soft leather chair. Maya had a massive glass corner office that felt exactly like a high-tech legal war room. We are not just playing defense today, Marcus, she said smoothly, sliding a thick stack of crisp legal documents across her smooth mahogany desk. I looked down at the heavy watermarked paper. What exactly is this, Maya? I asked, leaning forward to read the dense legal print. This is an ironclad, irrevocable blind trust, she explained, tapping her expensive silver pen against the thick manila files. We are taking your physical house, your city pension, your personal savings, and that $95 million lottery ticket, and we are locking them all away inside a massive, impenetrable legal vault. I picked up the heavy pen, feeling the cool, expensive metal against my rough, calloused finger. And once I finally signed this, I asked, looking directly into her sharp, dark eyes. Once you sign those specific papers, Maya stated firmly, folding her hands together, you legally own absolutely nothing on public paper. The trust becomes the sole undisputed owner of your entire financial estate. I will act as the primary managing legal trustee, and you will be the sole, fully protected beneficiary. I nodded slowly, understanding the sheer, brilliant power of her aggressive legal strategy. If I do not own anything, I realized out loud, then Andre cannot steal anything from my tired hands. Exactly, Maya smiled, a very cold, calculating expression that promised absolute destruction for our enemies. If his dangerous underground creditors try to place a heavy lien on your beautiful property, they will hit a massive, solid brick wall. If Andre tries to maliciously forge a fake deed, or fraudulently claim squatter rights, he will be fighting a massive, multi-billion-dollar corporate entity instead of a quiet, retired city engineer. I pressed the pen down, and I signed my name on the first solid, heavy line. I thought about the 30 long years I spent building that beautiful house, measuring every single board and hammering every single nail. I thought about my beautiful late wife and the deep, loving roots we had planted together in that Georgia soil. I was not giving my home away today. I was pouring a brand new, indestructible concrete foundation right underneath it to protect it from greedy parasites. Maya pulled the first signed document away, quickly sliding the next heavy page directly in front of me. This specific legal form officially transfers the physical winning ticket into the absolute protection of the trust, she instructed, pointing to a small blank signature line at the bottom of the page. The State Lottery Commission has already fully accepted our emergency injunction, but this document permanently removes your personal name from the public payout registry. I signed the second paper without a single moment of doubt or hesitation. The massive, life-changing money did not mean a single thing to me if it meant losing my daily peace and my hard-earned dignity. We spent the next 2 full hours carefully reviewing and signing every single page of the massive legal binder. Maya brought in a quiet, serious public notary to officially stamp and perfectly verify every single drop of dark ink. The heavy mechanical thud of the official notary seal echoed loudly through the quiet glass office. It sounded exactly like a heavy steel vault door slamming permanently shut, locking Andre out forever. "We are officially completely finished," Maya finally announced, gathering the thick, heavy documents into a neat, highly secure pile. "Your entire life is now entirely bulletproof, Marcus." I stood up slowly from the comfortable leather chair, feeling an incredible light weightlessness spreading through my tired shoulders. The deep, heavy burden of constantly protecting my physical assets was entirely gone. "What happens to the boy now?" I asked, walking over to the massive window to look at the sprawling, busy city below. Maya stood up, walking over to the glass and standing quietly beside me. "Now we simply wait for him to break," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "We have completely cut off his only financial escape route. He is trapped inside your house, entirely surrounded by his massive, terrifying mob debts. When a desperate, greedy animal realizes he is completely cornered, he will inevitably make a massive, fatal mistake." I looked out at the bright afternoon sun reflecting off the tall, steel corporate buildings. "He owes a lot of terrible people," I reminded her, remembering the terrifying dark ledger that was waiting for him. "Then he is officially on a ticking clock," Maya replied coldly, turning away from the bright window. "And when the clock finally strikes 0, we will be perfectly positioned to sweep up the broken, pathetic pieces of his life." I thanked her quietly, leaving the high-rise legal fortress and stepping back out into the busy, noisy streets of Atlanta. I did not have a massive luxury mansion to easily sleep in tonight, and my own daughter was still trapped inside a collapsing, toxic illusion. But as I walked slowly down the bright, crowded sidewalk, I felt a deep, profound peace. I was a quiet man, with absolutely no property on paper, but I held all the real power safely in the palm of my hand. Andre stepped back into the quiet foyer, his face burning from the utter humiliation on the front lawn. He locked the heavy wooden door, leaning his sweating forehead against the cool wood. He took a deep, ragged breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. But there was absolutely no peace waiting for him inside. Kendra was standing perfectly still right in the middle of the large living room. She was holding his thick black leather binder tightly in her trembling hands. The broken, splintered pieces of his desk drawer were scattered across the thick carpet behind her. "You lied to me," Kendra whispered, her voice completely broken and entirely hollow. "You owe $300,000 to dangerous criminals, Andre." Andre felt his stomach drop completely through the hardwood floor. He took a slow, cautious step forward, raising his empty hands like he was approaching a wild animal. "Kendra, please," he begged, his voice cracking violently. "I can explain absolutely everything. It is just a temporary cash flow problem, and the massive lottery money will easily cover all of it." "There is no lottery money," she screamed, throwing the heavy black binder directly at his chest. The thick book hit him hard, falling heavily to the floor and spilling his terrifying gambling debts all over the beautiful rug. "My father legally locked the account, and you have absolutely nothing," she cried out. Before Andre could formulate another pathetic lie, the heavy front door rattled violently in its frame. He had just locked it, but a sharp metallic click echoed loudly through the quiet foyer. Someone had just picked the heavy brass lock with terrifying professional speed. The heavy oak door swung open slowly, entirely on its own. The warm afternoon breeze blew into the house, carrying a cold, silent threat. Two incredibly large men wearing dark, expensive suits stepped casually into the entryway. They did not knock, and they did not ask for polite permission. They walked into my house like they already owned the entire property. Kendra gasped loudly, stepping backwards in absolute terror, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Andre completely froze in place, the blood draining entirely from his pale face. "Silas," he stammered, his voice dropping to a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "What are you doing inside my house?" A third man stepped slowly through the open doorway. He was much older and much quieter than the two massive enforcers. He wore a sharp, custom gray suit, and he carried a heavy, silver-tipped walking cane. This was Silas, the ruthless operator who owned the massive underground gambling ring operating strictly in the dark shadows of Atlanta. "This is a very beautiful home," Silas said quietly, looking up at the high, custom ceiling. "It shows absolute remarkable craftsmanship. It is a terrible shame that you do not actually own it, Andre. I have the cash coming." "Silas," Andre pleaded desperately, falling completely to his knees right on the expensive Persian rug. "I won the state lottery last night. $95 million. I just need a tiny bit of time to clear the annoying legal paperwork." Silas walked slowly into the living room, the sharp metal tip of his cane clicking rhythmically against the solid hardwood floor. He stopped right in front of the kneeling, weeping boy, looking down at him with absolute terrifying indifference. "I know exactly what happened today," Silas said smoothly, his quiet voice filling the massive room. "I know your leased car was dragged away by a rusty tow truck. I know you begged your neighbors for help, and they laughed right in your face. And I know your brilliant father-in-law completely froze the lottery payout early this morning. You are a broke, pathetic liar, Andre." Kendra whimpered quietly in the corner, pressing her shaking back hard against the drywall. Silas briefly glanced at her, offering a slow, chilling nod of acknowledgement before turning his dark, dead eyes back to Andre. "You owe my organization $300,000, Silas stated flatly, leaning his heavy weight onto the silver cane. "We extended your credit because you swore your wealthy father-in-law was going to die soon, leaving you this massive estate. But he is not dead, and you are completely out of time. Please, Silas." Andre sobbed loudly, hot tears streaming openly down his sweating face. "Just give me 1 week. I will find a way to break the legal trust. I will force the old man to sign the property over to me. I am a very reasonable businessman," Silas replied quietly, reaching into his tailored jacket and pulling out a silver pocket watch. "I will not give you 1 week, Andre. I'm going to give you exactly 48 hours. Andre gasped for air, his eyes widening in pure, absolute terror. 48 hours is not enough time, he cried out. his hands shaking violently on the floor. "You have 48 hours to deliver $300,000 in unmarked cash," Silas repeated, completely ignoring the pathetic begging. "If the money is not fully secured by this exact time on Thursday afternoon, my associates will return to this beautiful house, and they will not be picking the front lock to have a polite conversation. They will take your life to settle the final balance." Silas clicked his silver pocket watch shut, placing it smoothly back into his jacket pocket. He turned around slowly, walking back toward the open front door, his two massive enforcers following closely behind him. "Remember," Andre, Silas called out, pausing right on the front porch. "The clock is officially ticking. Do not make me come back here for a violent collection." The heavy door closed softly, leaving a terrifying, suffocating silence in its wake. Andre stayed on his knees, staring blindly at the scattered ledger pages, completely paralyzed by the looming shadow of his own death. He was totally cornered, completely cut off from the lottery millions, and staring directly down the barrel of a fatal, unbreakable ultimatum. The polite civil conflict was entirely over. He had to find a way to completely steal my life savings, or he was going to die in my living room. The heavy oak door clicked completely shut, leaving a cold, terrifying silence in my beautiful living room. Andre remained on his knees, his expensive suit wrinkled and soaked with his own terrified sweat. Kendra stood in the corner, pressing her hands tightly against her pale face. She looked down at the man she had married, and she finally saw the absolute, undeniable truth. He was not a wealthy king or a brilliant businessman. He was a dead man walking with a 48-hour expiration date. She slowly backed away, turning her head in complete disgust, and she walked quietly up the long stairs, leaving him entirely alone with his massive, scattered debts. Andre stared blankly at the floor, his mind racing, violently looking for a magical escape hatch. The $95 million lottery ticket was completely frozen by a federal injunction. He knew a standard civil lawsuit to break through Maya and her legal wall would take at least 3 to 5 years. Silas had given him exactly 48 hours before his violent enforcers returned to collect his life. Time was a heavy, lethal weapon, and Andre had absolutely none of it left to swing. Desperation is a very dangerous poison, and it quickly turns a foolish boy into a reckless criminal. Andre realized instantly that he could not touch the massive lottery money in time to save his own skin. But his greedy mind quickly pivoted to a different target. He remembered my quiet, steady life savings. He thought about my hard-earned city pension and the comfortable cash accounts I had built over 30 long years of breaking my back for the city. He desperately calculated that I must have at least $400,000 sitting unprotected in a local bank branch. He pushed himself off the Persian rug, his legs shaking violently under his own weight. He walked slowly back down the hallway, stepping over the sharp, broken wood of his ruined mahogany desk. He sat heavily in his expensive office chair, pulling his sleek silver laptop close to his chest. He was no longer looking for a civil defense attorney or a polite legal loophole. He was actively searching the dark, quiet corners of the internet for a malicious criminal shortcut. His frantic fingers typed quickly across the keyboard, and he found exactly what he needed. He downloaded a blank, comprehensive legal template for a total financial power of attorney. It was a massive, dangerous legal document that would legally grant him absolute, undisputed control over every single dime attached to my name. But a standard legal form strictly requires a verified signature from the actual account holder. He knew I would rather die than sign my entire life away to him. So he made the fatal, terrible decision to completely forge my name. But Andre was incredibly terrified of getting caught at the teller window. A forged signature presented by a sweaty, desperate man was a massive risk at a local bank branch. He needed a secondary psychological weapon to completely disarm the bank manager and bypass any standard security questions. He needed to officially prove that I was a frail, senile old man, entirely incapable of managing my own daily affairs. If he could quickly get me declared mentally incompetent, the forged power of attorney would instantly become a fully validated, lethal weapon. He formulated a sickening, vicious trap sitting alone in the dark room. He decided he would call Adult Protective Services and file a completely fabricated emergency abuse report. He planned to tell the state investigators that I was suffering from severe advanced dementia. He would lie through his teeth, claiming I was wandering the dangerous streets entirely confused and posing a massive physical danger to myself. He wanted to paint a sad, pathetic picture of a decaying, broken father who desperately needed his loving, responsible son-in-law to step in and seize control. It was an evil, unforgivable plan. He was entirely willing to completely destroy my lifelong reputation, violently strip away my legal autonomy, and steal the very bread from my table just to satisfy a bloodthirsty mob boss. He hit the print button on his laptop, and the quiet machine hummed, spitting out the blank legal forms. The crisp white paper glowed brightly in the dark, messy room, a physical manifestation of his impending felony. He reached into his broken desk drawer, pulling out a heavy blue ink pen. He was completely crossing the strict boundary from a petty civil family dispute into a massive federal crime. He did not know that Maya and I had already secured my actual bank account safely inside an impenetrable blind trust. He foolishly believed he had found the perfect bloody exit to his terrifying nightmare. He gripped the pen tightly, preparing to execute at his desperate crime and setting the final devastating stage for his own absolute ruin. The heavy, suffocating silence of the guest bedroom pressed down on Andre. He sat alone at the broken mahogany desk, staring at the crisp, blank legal forms. The clock was ticking loudly, a constant, terrifying reminder of the 48-hour death sentence hanging right over his head. He reached into a dusty, forgotten file cabinet in the corner of the room. He rummaged frantically through old tax returns and ancient utility bills, looking for my exact handwritten signature. He finally found an old faded bank check from 5 years ago. My name was signed clearly at the bottom in thick blue ink. Andre placed the old check right next to the blank power of attorney form. He picked up his expensive pen, his hand shaking violently under the massive pressure of his crime. He pressed the pen down onto a piece of scratch paper and he began to trace the letters. My signature is not fancy, but it is firm, and it is built on 30 years of hard, honest work. The letter M has a sharp, heavy peak, and the letter S loops back with a distinct, steady curve. He practiced writing my name over and over again. He filled an entire blank page with messy, nervous ink. The first few attempts were incredibly jagged, exposing his severe internal panic, but he forced his hand to steady, taking deep, ragged breaths. He spent 3 agonizing hours sitting in the dark, perfectly mimicking my exact handwriting. He studied the sharp slant and the spacing between the letters until he had manufactured a near-perfect forgery. He finally moved his hand over to the official legal document, and he signed my name at the very bottom. The trap was officially set on public paper. But a piece of forged paper was not enough to break into a secure bank. He needed the state to officially strip away my basic human rights. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, and he dialed the emergency hotline for Adult Protective Services. The phone rang 3 times before a tired professional woman answered the line. State Protective Services. How can I direct your call? She asked, her voice echoing softly in the quiet room. Andre immediately launched into a sickening Oscar-winning performance. He forced his voice to crack, perfectly imitating a loving, desperate son who was completely out of options. My name is Andre Blake, he said, letting out a heavy, fabricated sigh. I am calling to report a severe medical emergency regarding my elderly father-in-law, Marcus. The state worker instantly switched into intake mode, her keyboard clicking rapidly through the phone speaker. "What is the nature of the emergency?" "Blake?" she asked, completely unaware of the evil criminal intent on the other end of the line. "He has completely lost his mind," Andre lied smoothly, wiping a fake tear from his sweating face. "He is suffering from advanced severe dementia, and he is becoming a massive physical danger to himself and to our neighborhood. He wandered out of our house last night completely confused, and he did not even know his own daughter's name." "I'm so sorry to hear that," the intake worker said sympathetically. "Has he exhibited any other dangerous behaviors inside the home?" Andre smiled, a dark, twisted smile, leaning back in his broken chair. "He left the gas stove burning for 3 straight hours yesterday. He continued piling lie upon terrifying lie. I had to throw him out of the house just to protect my terrified wife from a massive explosion. He is completely incapable of managing his own daily affairs or his financial accounts. He needs immediate aggressive state intervention before he accidentally kills himself or someone else." The operator typed furiously, documenting every single fabricated word into a permanent legal state file. "We take these specific reports incredibly seriously, Mr. Blake," she assured him, her tone shifting to urgent official action. "We will dispatch a senior field investigator to locate Marcus and conduct an emergency competency evaluation within the next 24 hours. If your claims are fully verified, the state will step in and grant you full legal conservatorship." "Thank you so much, Andre," whispered into the phone, playing the role of the relieved, exhausted guardian. "You are saving our family today." He hung up the phone, dropping it heavily onto the desk. A sick, arrogant grin spread slowly across his pale face. He looked down at the forged power of attorney resting right next to his laptop. He honestly believed he was a brilliant mastermind. He thought he had successfully weaponized the entire state government to do his dirty work. He thought he was going to walk into my local bank, wave a state-mandated conservatorship paper, and drain my entire life savings right into his empty pockets. But a foolish, desperate boy always forgets to check the actual foundation before he jumps out of the window. He did not know that the money was already gone, legally locked away inside an impenetrable fortress. And he certainly did not know that I was fully prepared to play his twisted little game and spring a massive, devastating trap of my own making. I was sitting quietly in a worn red leather booth at the very back of a small neighborhood diner. It was a modest place with faded linoleum floors and the heavy smell of black coffee. I'd been coming here for 20 years, long before Andre ever stepped foot into my city. I was staying at a simple, clean motel just a few miles down the road, waiting patiently for the storm to break. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, keeping my eyes fixed directly on the glass front door. The small brass bell hanging right above the diner entrance chimed a sharp, bright warning. Andre pushed through the heavy glass, stepping nervously into the quiet room. He looked absolutely terrible, like a man who had not slept for an entire week. His expensive custom-tailored suit was deeply wrinkled, and his expensive silk tie was pulled completely loose. His dark eyes were bloodshot, constantly darting around the small restaurant filled with pure, unfiltered paranoia. He spotted my old flannel shirt sitting calmly in the back corner. He walked quickly across the faded floor, his heavy leather shoes squeaking slightly against the linoleum. He slid clumsily into the booth directly across from me, his hands shaking so violently he knocked over the small metal sugar dispenser. I did not say a single word to greet him. I just set my heavy coffee mug down and I watched him sweat. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry," Andre began, his voice cracking with a pathetic manufactured emotion. He immediately buried his pale face deep in his trembling hands, letting out a loud, dramatic sob. The few regular customers sitting at the long front counter turned their heads slightly to watch his ridiculous performance. "I was completely out of my mind last night," he cried loudly, peeking through his fingers to see if I was buying his terrible act. The expensive champagne and the massive shock of the lottery money completely poisoned my brain. I said terrible, unforgivable things to you, and I have hated myself every single second since you left. I kept my face completely blank, entirely composed like a solid brick wall. The boy was a terrible actor, and his fake, forced tears were absolutely sickening to watch. He did not feel an ounce of real regret for throwing me out of my own home. He was only crying because the heavy steel trap of his own mob debt was finally snapping shut around his neck. Kendra is absolutely devastated. Andre continued shamelessly using my own daughter as a cheap emotional weapon. She has not stopped crying since you walked out the front door. We both want you to come back home right now. We belong together as a real family, and we can easily fix all of this ugly mess. He reached into the inside pocket of his wrinkled suit jacket, pulling out a thick, folded piece of crisp white paper. He flattened the heavy document out directly on the sticky diner table, sliding it slowly toward me. His shaking fingers left damp, sweaty prints on the smooth edges of the paper. "I just need you to do one tiny favor for me, Andre," whispered his voice, dropping to a desperate, urgent plea. The city tax office sent over a standard property verification form early this morning. They said there is a massive clerical error regarding the primary deed to the house. If we do not file this simple correction today, they are going to freeze the entire property and heavily fine us both. I looked down at the thick piece of paper. The top half of the document was covered in dense, confusing legal jargon, entirely designed to overwhelm a tired, uneducated mind. But I'm not an ignorant man, and I've read hundreds of complex city contracts in my 30 years of civil engineering. The paper was not a standard tax form from the city government. It was a highly manipulative secondary legal release specifically designed to bypass the mandatory waiting periods on large bank transfers. He wanted my actual verified signature to solidify the massive forgery he had already committed in the dark. "Please, Marcus," Andre begged pathetically, pulling a heavy blue pen from his expensive pocket. "Just sign this one single page, and we can put all of this terrible anger completely behind us. We can go back to the house, and we can finally celebrate our beautiful new life together." He clicked the heavy pen, holding it out to me like it was a peaceful olive branch. But I knew exactly what it was. It was a loaded gun pointed directly at my chest. He needed my authentic signature to completely drain my life savings and hand it over to a violent criminal. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, fully expecting me to be a weak, gullible old fool desperate to return to a comfortable bed. I looked at the shiny blue pen, and I looked back at his sweating, terrified face. The incredible, vicious audacity of his plot was almost impressive in its absolute cruelty. He was entirely willing to destroy me with a fake smile and a fake tear. I slowly reached my calloused hand forward, picking up the heavy pen, feeling the cold metal against my skin. I prepared to lean entirely into his twisted illusion and give him exactly the performance he was desperately begging to see. I took the heavy blue pen from his shaking hand. I stared blankly at the shiny metal, and then I looked up at his desperate face. I let my jaw drop slightly, letting my eyes go completely wide and empty. If he wanted to play a dirty, deceptive game, I was going to give him an absolute masterclass. "What kind of tax form is this, Andre?" I asked, forcing my voice to tremble just a little bit. My head feels so foggy today, and I cannot seem to focus on all these tiny words. "It is just a standard property update," Dad Andre said quickly, his voice dripping with fake patience. "The city just needs to know that you are still the primary resident. It is nothing to worry about, I promise." I leaned forward, squinting my eyes hard at the sticky diner table. "But why does the city need this today?" I mumbled, scratching the side of my head, looking entirely lost. "Did your mother tell you to bring this to me?" Andre blinked hard entirely, caught off guard by the sudden bizarre question. "My mother?" he asked, looking incredibly confused. "I mean, Kendra." I corrected myself slowly, purposefully mixing up the names of my own family members. No, I mean Marianne. Did Marianne send you here to find me today? I need to ask my wife before I sign any important papers from the government. A sudden dark flash of pure victory completely washed over his sweating face. My beautiful wife Marianne had been resting peacefully in the ground for over 8 years. Andre instantly realized I was serving him exactly what he needed on a silver platter. He thought my mind was finally violently breaking down, exactly like he had probably reported to the state. I knew how these vicious predators worked. He needed me to look completely crazy to justify whatever massive crime he was currently committing in the dark. Marianne is not here right now. Marcus, Andre replied softly, leaning across the table, speaking to me like I was a helpless toddler. She told me to handle this for you so you can just relax and come back home with me. She said it is very important that you sign the paper right now so we do not lose our beautiful house. She said that, I whispered, letting my hand shake violently as I held the heavy pen over the document. The blue ink hovered dangerously close to the blank signature line. I put on a pathetic, fearful expression, looking around the small, quiet diner as if I did not know where I was. What day is it, Andre? I asked, letting a single drop of fake panic enter my tired voice. Why am I sitting in this loud restaurant all by myself? It is just a simple Tuesday. Andre lied smoothly, his dark eyes glowing with greedy anticipation. You just got a little bit confused on your walk today, and I came to pick you up. You are perfectly safe with me, Marcus. Just sign the paper right here on this little black line, and I will take you straight home to your comfortable bed. He was a terrible, vicious boy closing in on a wounded animal. He tapped his index finger right on the signature line, entirely unable to hide his desperate, rushing greed. I knew he was recording this entire interaction with the cell phone sitting quietly inside his expensive jacket pocket. He needed a clear, undeniable audio recording of my severe mental confusion to legally protect himself. He was absolutely thrilled that I was making it so incredibly easy for him. I lowered the heavy pen, letting the sharp blue tip finally touch the crisp white paper. I felt his intense, burning stare completely locked onto my right hand. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing echoing across the small table. He thought he had completely won the war. He thought he had officially defeated the strong, stubborn old builder who had provided the very roof over his head. Okay, Andre, I muttered quietly, forcing my hand to tremble violently against the smooth paper. If Marianne says it is okay, then I will sign the city paper for you. I just want to go home and take a long nap. My bones hurt so much today, and the streetlights are much too bright for my old eyes. That is a very good man. Andre encouraged a sick, victorious smile stretching completely across his pale face. Just write your name nice and clear right on that specific line, and we will make all your terrible problems go completely away. I pressed the heavy pen down, pretending to struggle with the simple act of writing my own name. I am an old, retired engineer, and I know exactly how to construct a perfect, inescapable physical trap. I was intentionally feeding his massive, foolish ego, setting the heavy, lethal bait right in front of his starving, desperate mouth. I held the heavy blue pen, hovering right over the thick white paper. I let my hand shake violently, pretending to struggle with the simple letters of my own name. Andre leaned in incredibly close, his eyes completely locked onto the tip of the pen. He was practically drooling with desperate greed. I moved the pen just a fraction of an inch, and then I intentionally let my elbow slip hard against the sticky diner table. My arm slammed directly into my heavy ceramic mug of hot black coffee. The large mug tipped over instantly, spilling a massive wave of dark, steaming liquid all over the crisp legal document. Andre screamed out loud, completely losing his fake patient composure. He jumped back forcefully in the red leather booth as the hot coffee splashed heavily onto his expensive custom suit. No, he shouted frantically, grabbing the soaking wet paper and trying to shake the dark liquid off. What are you doing, you clumsy old fool? He yelled, his true vicious nature instantly flashing across his sweating face. The thick legal document was completely ruined. The dark brown stains covered the dense legal text, and the paper tore apart right in his shaking hands. I shrank back in the booth, putting on a pathetic, fearful face, acting like a terrified child. "I am so sorry, Andre," I whimpered, keeping my voice very low and completely submissive. My old hands just gave out and I could not hold my arm up. "Please do not be angry with me." Andre took a deep, ragged breath, closing his eyes tightly and forcing the evil monster back into its cage. He wiped the hot coffee off his expensive silk tie, and he forced a tight, sickening smile back onto his face. "It is absolutely fine, Marcus," he said through gritted teeth, his chest heaving with barely controlled rage. "It was just a silly, clumsy accident. But a desperate, terrifying mob debt does not leave room for failure." Andre reached incredibly deep into his ruined suit jacket, and he pulled out a secondary identical stack of folded papers. I knew a greedy, paranoid boy would always bring a backup copy to his own desperate robbery. He smoothed the new dry papers out right on the wet table. His hands were shaking so terribly that he had to press his bare palms firmly all over the crisp white pages just to keep them flat. He wiped the nervous sweat directly from his pale forehead, and he touched the signature line repeatedly. He was leaving a massive, undeniable trail of physical fingerprints and raw DNA all over the fraudulent state documents. "I need you to try again, Marcus," Andre commanded softly, sliding the fresh document right in front of me. "Do not spill anything this time. Just sign the bottom line and we can finally leave this dirty place." I looked up slowly past his sweating, desperate face. Right above his head, mounted securely in the corner of the diner ceiling, was a high-definition security camera. I had specifically chosen this exact booth because the owner of the diner was an old friend of mine. He had upgraded his entire security system just last month with crystal-clear, high-resolution video recording. Every single second of Andre screaming at a frail old man and aggressively forcing fraudulent papers onto the table was being captured perfectly on a permanent digital hard drive. I picked up the heavy pen again, and I looked right into the camera lens for a brief silent second. Then I looked down, and I signed my name at the very bottom of the page. I did not use my strong, steady signature. I scribbled a weak, jagged, entirely unreadable mess that looked exactly like the desperate scratching of a severely confused medical patient. Andre snatched the paper, instantly pulling it away before the ink was even completely dry. He stared at the terrible, messy signature, and his eyes completely lit up with absolute wicked triumph. To his greedy, foolish mind, the messy signature was absolute perfect proof of my severe mental decline. It was exactly what he needed to convince a busy bank teller that I was completely incompetent. He folded the paper quickly, shoving it deep into his inside pocket right next to his hidden recording cell phone. "Thank you so much, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with pure toxic relief. "You just saved our entire family today. I will be right back to get you after I drop this off at the city office. Just stay right here and drink your coffee." He slid quickly out of the booth, completely abandoning his fake loving son routine the very second he got what he wanted. He practically ran out of the small diner, pushing aggressively through the glass door and rushing out into the bright Atlanta sun. He was speeding directly toward my bank, entirely convinced he was a brilliant, wealthy king. I sat perfectly still in the quiet red booth, watching his car speed away. I wiped a small drop of spilled coffee off my heavy work boots. The trap was completely set, the physical evidence was totally secured, and the arrogant boy was driving himself at top speed straight into a massive, impenetrable brick wall. I finished my black coffee and I walked slowly out of the quiet diner. I drove my old truck back to the clean, simple motel on the very edge of the city. I unlocked the heavy door and I sat down quietly on the edge of the firm mattress. I knew the terrible ticking clock was entirely in motion now. I did not have to wait very long at all. Exactly 30 minutes later, a firm, professional knock echoed loudly against my motel door. I stood up smoothly, smoothing out the wrinkles in my flannel shirt, and I opened the door. A serious woman wearing a neat professional suit was standing right there on the concrete walkway. She held a thick official clipboard tucked tightly under her left arm. She looked at me with a careful mixture of caution and deep trained concern. "Are you Marcus?" she asked, her voice incredibly calm and measured. "I am an official state investigator with Georgia Adult Protective Services. We received a highly urgent emergency medical report today regarding your mental welfare and your physical safety." I opened the door wider, inviting her inside and offering her the only clean chair in the small room. I sat back down on the edge of the bed, resting my calloused hands firmly on my knees. "I am Marcus," I replied smoothly, "and I am perfectly fine today." The investigator sat down, pulling a silver pen from her tailored suit jacket. She opened her thick folder and she began to ask me the standard, rigorous medical questions. "What is your full legal name?" she asked, looking directly into my eyes. "What is the exact date today? And who is the current sitting president of the United States?" I did not shake and I did not stutter. I dropped the pathetic, confused act that I had just performed for Andre, completely shedding the fake skin. I answered every single question with the sharp, calculated precision of a master builder. I told her the exact date, the precise time of day, and my exact physical location. She asked me about my daily finances and my ability to manage my own accounts. I explained the complex mathematical specifications of the last massive suspension bridge I had personally designed for the city. I spoke clearly, without a single moment of hesitation or mental fog. The investigator slowly stopped writing. She clicked her silver pen shut, and she lowered her thick clipboard onto her lap. A deep, highly suspicious frown formed quickly on her face. "You absolutely do not have dementia," she stated, flatly, staring at my steady, unblinking eyes. "The emergency report stated that you left a gas stove running for 3 straight hours and wandered blindly into a dangerous intersection." "I do not even own a gas stove," I replied quietly, keeping my posture completely straight and relaxed. "My house is entirely electric, and I installed the heavy wiring system with my own 2 hands 30 years ago. The desperate boy who called you is my son-in-law, Andre. He's currently drowning in $300,000 of violent underground mob debt." The investigator gasped slightly, her eyes widening at the massive, criminal scale of the ugly truth. "He just sat across from me in a local diner less than an hour ago," I continued, my voice entirely steady and calm. "He forced me to sign a fake, fraudulent city document. He desperately needs me to be declared legally incompetent today, so he can use a forged power of attorney to completely steal my entire life savings. He thought I was a broken, senile old fool, but I gave him a fake, messy signature, completely on purpose, right under a high-definition security camera." She looked at me, completely shocked by the brilliant, aggressive legal trap I had just described. "You seem incredibly aware of this entire financial situation," she said, her voice filled with sudden, immense respect. "I am an old civil engineer," I explained smoothly, "and I do not ever make wild claims without having the solid blueprints to back them up. My corporate attorney, Maya, has already placed my entire physical estate and my massive bank accounts securely into an ironclad blind trust. The boy has absolutely no access to a single dime. He is completely desperate out of time, and he is using your vital state agency as a cheap, malicious weapon." The investigator closed her thick folder with a loud, sharp snap. She recognized the clear, undeniable truth sitting right in front of her. She had interviewed hundreds of truly vulnerable, confused seniors, and she knew exactly what absolute razor-sharp competence looked like. "Filing a malicious false medical report is a severe state crime, Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, angry whisper. "He tried to completely waste our emergency resources to commit a massive federal fraud. I'm officially closing your medical file right this second, and I am permanently flagging his name in our central government database." She stood up quickly, shaking my rough hand with a firm, solid grip. "You are a very brilliant man, Marcus," she smiled warmly. "Please stay perfectly safe and let the authorities handle that foolish boy." "Thank you for your time today," I said politely, walking her to the door. She walked out of this quiet motel room, leaving me completely cleared of his dirty psychological trap. The state government was no longer a dangerous weapon pointed at my head. It was now an official documented shield standing firmly in front of me. While I was sitting comfortably, fully protected by the absolute truth, Andre was rushing blindly across the city, walking straight into the very center of his own terrifying destruction. Andre sped down the busy Atlanta highway, his foot pressing heavily on the gas pedal. He felt an incredibly toxic rush of pure, unfiltered adrenaline completely flooding his veins. He looked over at the passenger seat, staring greedily at the folded white paper resting right there. The messy, jagged blue ink that I had intentionally scribbled at the diner was his absolute golden ticket. He honestly believed he had completely outsmarted a stubborn old builder and bypassed a massive federal injunction all in a single afternoon. He was flying incredibly high, completely intoxicated by his own arrogant delusions. He arrived at the main downtown branch of the massive Columbia Bank. It was a towering, intimidating building, constructed of solid white marble and thick reinforced glass. He parked his car recklessly, grabbing his expensive leather briefcase and practically running toward the main entrance. He paused for a brief second right outside the heavy revolving doors, catching his sweating reflection in the dark tinted glass. He straightened his expensive silk tie, and he wiped the nervous sweat completely off his pale forehead. He needed to look exactly like a wealthy, highly responsible family man carrying a heavy, tragic burden. He pushed through the heavy doors, stepping into the cool, quiet, air-conditioned lobby. The massive bank was incredibly quiet, smelling of expensive floor polish and old money. He completely ignored the long line of regular everyday customers standing patiently at the teller windows. He marched confidently across the polished marble floor, heading directly for the plush, carpeted executive area. He spotted the branch manager, a sharp, middle-aged woman named Janet, sitting behind a massive oak desk. He sat down heavily in the expensive leather chair directly across from her. He let out a long, perfectly practiced, trembling sigh of absolute exhaustion. "Hello, Janet," he said quietly, making his voice sound incredibly thick and heavy with manufactured grief. "My name is Andre Blake, and I am facing a completely devastating medical family emergency today. My father-in-law, Marcus, has unfortunately suffered a massive, complete mental collapse." Janet looked up from her bright computer monitor, folding her hands politely on top of her clean desk. "I'm so incredibly sorry to hear that, Mr. Blake," she replied, her voice completely calm and highly professional. "Dealing with severe dementia is a terrible burden for any family. How exactly can Columbia Bank assist you during this very painful transition?" Andre unlatched his leather briefcase, pulling the fraudulent power of attorney out into the bright office light. He slid the heavy, crisp document smoothly across the polished oak wood. "I have been forced to take immediate total legal control of his entire financial estate." Andre lied effortlessly, looking directly into her eyes. "He is wandering the dangerous city streets, completely lost, and he needs immediate, highly expensive medical intervention. As you can clearly see by his terrible declining signature at the bottom, his mind is entirely gone." Janet picked up the heavy white paper, adjusting her reading glasses. She examined the dense legal text, and she looked very closely at the messy, jagged blue ink. "Time is incredibly critical today, Janet." Andre pressed, leaning his body aggressively forward, entirely unable to hide his desperate, starving greed. "The private medical facility requires a massive immediate cash deposit to secure his emergency treatment bed. I need you to immediately wire $400,000 out of his primary savings account." He requested the exact massive amount he desperately needed to completely pay off Silas and save his own miserable life. He watched Janet carefully, his heart hammering violently right against his ribcage. He thought he was a brilliant, unstoppable criminal mastermind. He thought his fake tears and his forged government document were completely fooling the massive billion-dollar banking system. I completely understand the severe urgency of this medical situation, Mr. Blake, Janet stated professionally, picking up the fraudulent paper and standing up smoothly from her desk. I just need to quickly verify these specific legal documents with our central legal department. Please wait right here in my office, and I will process this massive transfer as quickly as humanly possible. Andre nodded vigorously, a bright, sickening smile completely breaking through his fake grief. Take all the time you need, Janet, he replied smoothly, sinking back comfortably into the plush leather chair. He watched her walk away, disappearing quickly down a long, quiet hallway. A massive, overwhelming wave of pure, toxic relief washed entirely over his sweating body. He looked down at his expensive gold watch ticking loudly on his wrist. He had completely beaten the terrifying 48-hour deadline. He had successfully stolen my entire life savings, and he was going to walk out of this massive building as a completely free, wealthy man. He sat alone in the quiet, comfortable executive office, entirely unaware of the lethal reality moving silently all around him. He did not know that Janet was not walking to a standard fax machine. She was walking directly into the highly secure, restricted bank fraud department, carrying the exact physical evidence that was going to completely destroy his miserable, worthless life. Janet walked quickly down the long, carpeted hallway, completely out of sight. She did not go to a regular copy machine, and she did not call a standard legal representative. She swiped her highly secure employee badge, opening a heavy, reinforced steel door. She stepped directly into the primary fraud prevention department of the massive banking institution. She walked straight over to a senior security analyst, dropping the crisp white paper right onto his desk. I need you to run a severe, immediate verification on this specific document, Janet commanded, pointing sharply at the messy blue signature. The young man in my office is claiming emergency medical conservatorship and demanding a $400,000 immediate cash wire. The security analyst nodded quickly, taking the thick paper and scanning the barcode into the central banking mainframe. He typed my personal social security number right into his keyboard and he hit the enter button. The massive billion-dollar computer system did not process a withdrawal. It did not even load a standard account profile. The large monitor instantly completely locked up, flashing a bright, aggressive red warning screen that illuminated the entire dark room. There are no personal savings accounts legally attached to the social security number, the analyst stated flatly, his eyes scanning the urgent red text. All of his physical assets and his massive cash accounts were completely transferred into an irrevocable blind trust exactly 24 hours ago. This young man is trying to rob an empty concrete vault. Janet leaned closer to the bright screen, her eyes narrowing in complete disgust. And what about the physical signature on the state document, she asked. The analyst pulled up my actual authentic signature card that had been on file for over 20 years. He placed it right next to the scanned, forged document on his digital screen. The algorithm just flagged it as a massive, undeniably fraudulent forgery, he confirmed, shaking his head slowly. The blue ink is intentionally jagged and it completely fails every single biometric security check. We also have a highly urgent federal legal alert placed directly on this specific file by a senior corporate attorney named Maya. I was sitting quietly on the firm edge of my motel bed, watching the dust motes float peacefully in the afternoon sunlight. My cell phone vibrated heavily right inside my pocket. I pulled it out, and I saw Maya calling. I answered the phone, keeping my tired voice very low and steady. The heavy steel trap just snapped completely shut, Maya said smoothly. a deep, victorious satisfaction ringing clearly through the speaker. We caught the desperate rat, Marcus. He is sitting inside the Columbia Bank executive lobby right this very second, trying to cash your forged power of attorney. I smiled a slow, incredibly cold smile, entirely devoid of any humor or joy. Did the bank system flag his paper, I asked, listening to the quiet hum of the motel air conditioner. He ran completely headfirst into a solid brick wall. Maya laughed sharply, the sound echoing with absolute legal authority. The branch manager is confiscating the fraudulent document right now. It is no longer just a piece of paper, Marcus. It is officially physical evidence of a massive federal felony. He handed them the loaded gun with his own dirty fingerprints completely covering the handle. I thanked her quietly and I hung up the phone, feeling the final heavy piece of the puzzle slide perfectly into place. Back at the massive downtown bank, Janet walked slowly back into her plush executive office. Andre sat up incredibly fast, his eyes completely wide, entirely expecting her to hand him a massive life-saving cashier check. But Janet was holding absolutely nothing. She sat back down behind her heavy oak desk, looking at the foolish, sweating boy with absolute freezing contempt. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Blake," Janet said, her voice completely stripped of all professional warmth and courtesy, "but I absolutely cannot process this massive cash withdrawal for you today." Andre felt the warm blood completely drain from his pale face. "What do you mean you cannot process it?" he demanded, his fake manufactured grief instantly vanishing into thin air. He was completely replaced by pure suffocating panic. "I gave you the legal state papers, Janet. My father-in-law is dying and I need that money right now. The personal accounts you are desperately trying to access do not legally exist in this bank," Janet stated flatly, folding her hands firmly together. "And this specific document has been officially flagged by our Central Fraud Department as a highly suspicious, malicious forgery. I am legally required to completely confiscate that paper and hand it directly to our corporate security team." Andre jumped up wildly from the expensive leather chair, his knees shaking so violently he almost collapsed right onto the floor. "You cannot keep my legal property," he screamed, his voice cracking, reaching aggressively across the wide desk. "Give me that paper back right now." Janet stood up immediately, without breaking her cold eye contact, and she pressed a silent security button, located perfectly under her desk. Two massive, heavily armed bank guards stepped quickly into the quiet office, placing their heavy hands right on their thick weapon belts. They stared directly at Andre, completely ready to use extreme physical force. "I highly suggest you leave this building right now, Mr. Blake," Janet commanded, pointing a sharp finger directly toward the glass doors. "Before I call the city police and have you arrested right here for attempted federal bank fraud." Andre backed away slowly, his entire fake, arrogant empire crumbling into worthless, invisible dust. He looked at the armed guards, and he realized he was completely, utterly defeated. He turned around and he ran frantically out of the massive building, pushing through the heavy revolving doors and sprinting out into the hot street. He was completely empty-handed, and his terrifying 48-hour mob deadline was quietly bleeding away. Andre ran out into the blazing Atlanta sun, his expensive suit completely soaked in cold, terrified sweat. He practically threw himself into his leased car, slamming the heavy door shut and locking it tight. He gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles turning completely white as his chest heaved with violent, shallow breaths. He was entirely out of options, and he was completely out of time. The terrifying, heavy ticking clock of Silas and his brutal enforcers was ringing loudly right inside his panicked head. He had failed to steal my life savings, and the fake government paper was completely confiscated by a massive corporate bank. But a desperate, greedy animal does not simply lay down and die without throwing one final vicious punch. Andre refused to accept his absolute crushing defeat. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the expensive device right onto the floorboard. He dialed the direct number for his own slimy, high-priced civil attorney. a man named Vance who made a highly lucrative living defending terrible people and stealing from the weak. Vance answered the phone, his voice slick and polished, completely unaware of the massive criminal felony his foolish client had just committed. "We have a massive critical emergency, Vance," Andre shouted into the phone, his voice cracking with pure, unfiltered panic. "My crazy father-in-law completely locked up the $95 million, and I need that money released right this very second." Vance sighed heavily, the sound echoing loudly through the small car speaker. "I already told you, Andre," the lawyer replied smoothly. "Breaking a federal injunction takes a massive amount of time and a very long, drawn-out civil trial. I do not have time for a stupid trial," Andre screamed, slamming his fist hard against the dashboard. "You need to call the State Lottery Commission right now. Demand an emergency binding mediation hearing for tomorrow morning. Tell them I am the rightful legal owner and the old man is just a bitter, confused thief trying to steal my family blessing." "If we force an official mediation," Vance warned, slowly calculating his own massive hourly billing rate, "we are putting absolutely everything on the table. If you lose the hearing, the state will permanently award the entire payout directly to him." "Just set the damn meeting," Andre demanded aggressively, completely blinded by his own suffocating desperation. "He's just a broke, stupid old construction worker. If I get him in a fancy corporate boardroom with a sharp state mediator, I will completely break him in half. I will force him to admit he gave the ticket to my wife as a permanent gift." Vance agreed to file the emergency paperwork, entirely driven by his own selfish greed, and he hung up the phone. Andre leaned his sweating head back against the leather seat, closing his bloodshot eyes. He honestly believed he could still talk his way out of a massive federal crime. He thought his loud, arrogant voice and his expensive suit would easily overpower the quiet, absolute truth. He was entirely clueless about the massive, lethal trap I had already built right underneath his feet. Later that exact same afternoon, I was sitting peacefully on the small concrete patio outside my quiet motel room. The warm Georgia breeze moved slowly through the tall pine trees, and I was drinking a cold glass of sweet iced tea. My cell phone vibrated smoothly right on the small metal table. I picked it up and I saw Maya calling me again. The desperate boy just made his final fatal move. Maya announced, her voice completely calm and highly focused. His attorney just filed a highly aggressive emergency demand for a final binding mediation hearing. They want to sit down face to face with the senior directors of the State Lottery Commission tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I took a slow, quiet sip of my sweet tea, looking out at the fading orange sunset. "He wants to fight me in public," I said smoothly. A deep, solid sense of peace settling completely over my mind. "He is incredibly desperate, and he thinks he can successfully intimidate you," Maya replied, the sharp sound of rustling paper echoing softly through the phone. "He does not know about the high-definition video from the diner. He does not know about the bank fraud report currently sitting on my desk. He thinks this is just a simple, she said, family argument over a piece of lucky paper." "Let him have his little hearing," I commanded, quietly, my voice dropping to a low, steady rumble. "I am completely ready to finish this ugly business. I will officially accept the mediation request on your behalf," Maya confirmed, her tone turning incredibly cold and lethal. "Get some good rest tonight, Marcus. Tomorrow morning we are going to walk into that massive boardroom and we are going to completely and totally execute this arrogant boy." I hung up the phone, setting it gently back on the metal table. The long, exhausting war was finally coming to a sudden, violent end. Andre had demanded a formal trial, completely unaware that he was eagerly walking right into his own permanent destruction. The bright morning sun completely flooded the massive glass boardroom. We were sitting on the top floor of the Georgia State Lottery Commission building, right in the very center of downtown Atlanta. Maya sat perfectly still right next to me at the long, polished mahogany table. She wore a sharp, dark gray power suit, and she had a thick, heavy leather briefcase resting completely closed in front of her. I wore the dark, heavy suit that I usually save for Sunday church service. It was not a custom designer outfit, but it was perfectly clean, and it commanded quiet, absolute respect. The heavy frosted glass doors swung open violently. Andre practically marched directly into the quiet boardroom, projecting a massive, completely fake aura of absolute victory. He wore a brand new, incredibly expensive tailored navy suit. His dark hair was perfectly slicked back, and his heavy gold watch caught the bright morning light. He honestly looked exactly like a wealthy, untouched king arriving to effortlessly collect his royal taxes. He completely ignored me pulling out a heavy leather chair and dropping his arrogant weight right into the soft cushions. His expensive, slimy civil attorney, a fast-talking man named Vance, sat down quickly right beside him. Vance opened his sleek briefcase, pulling out thin, useless legal pads. But my eyes did not focus on the lawyer or the arrogant boy. I looked directly at my only daughter. Kendra walked incredibly slowly through the heavy glass doors, looking completely hollow and utterly terrified. Her expensive designer dress hung loosely on her shaking frame, and she kept her bloodshot eyes entirely glued to the carpeted floor. She sat down at the very far edge of the long mahogany table, completely isolating herself from the monster she had married. I looked around the massive, intimidating boardroom, evaluating the incredibly strong, solid architecture. The heavy steel beams hidden perfectly behind the drywall were built to withstand a massive, violent earthquake. But the arrogant boy sitting directly across from me was built entirely out of cheap, rotting wood. He was completely hollow inside, entirely supported by the terrifying invisible weight of his $300,000 mob debt. The 48-hour deadline was breathing heavily right down his sweaty neck, and he was desperately using this mediation as his final massive gamble. The senior state mediator, a stern, older man with thick silver hair, walked briskly into the massive room. He carried a thick official state file, and he sat directly at the head of the long wooden table. He looked at the completely divided room, adjusting his heavy wire glasses and folding his hands firmly together. "Good morning, everyone," the mediator said, his deep voice echoing loudly against the solid glass walls. "We are here today to conduct an emergency binding legal mediation regarding the disputed ownership of a $95 million state lottery ticket." Andre leaned back comfortably in his plush leather chair, crossing his expensive legs with a massive, sickening smirk. He looked directly across the wide table, staring right into my calm, steady eyes. He wanted me to feel incredibly small and entirely powerless in this highly intimidating corporate environment. He thought his expensive lawyer and his loud, confident posture were going to completely crush my spirit in front of the state government. "You can just hand over the ticket right now, old man." Andre sneered quietly, leaning his sweating face slightly over the polished wood. "We all know you bought it for us, and you are just incredibly jealous of my massive success." Maya did not even turn her head to look at the foolish boy. She kept her dark eyes completely locked onto the senior state mediator. "Mr. Blake," Maya said smoothly, her voice slicing completely through the warm room, exactly like a freezing blade of solid ice. "I highly suggest you save your pathetic, desperate breath for your actual legal testimony today. You are currently speaking directly onto a permanent state recorded legal transcript." The mediator cleared his throat loudly, slamming his open palm flat against the mahogany table. "We will have absolutely no informal crosstalk in my boardroom today," the older man commanded sharply, looking directly at Andre with heavy, undeniable authority. "The state has agreed to this emergency hearing because a massive federal injunction is currently blocking a historic financial payout. I will listen strictly to the presented facts, and I will review the certified physical evidence. My final binding ruling today will determine the absolute permanent legal owner of this massive fortune." Andre just smiled wider, adjusting his expensive silk tie, and completely ignoring the heavy warning. He honestly believed he did not need any physical evidence because he was entirely convinced that his own twisted lies were completely flawless. He was strutting proudly right inside a massive, inescapable legal slaughterhouse, and he was entirely eager for the heavy blade to finally drop. The senior mediator opened the thick state file resting right in front of him, and he nodded firmly toward the slimy civil attorney. "You represent the primary claimant today, Mr. Vance," the mediator said smoothly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "So you may officially begin your opening statement." Vance stood up incredibly slowly, buttoning his expensive suit jacket with a highly practiced, arrogant flair. He walked out from behind his heavy leather chair, pacing back and forth across the thick boardroom carpet, exactly like a hungry theatrical predator. He did not look at me, and he completely ignored Maya. He locked his sharp, deceitful eyes directly onto the senior state official, and he began to spin a massive, disgusting web of absolute lies. "We are sitting in this room today," Vance began loudly, his voice dripping with a sickening manufactured sympathy because a beautiful young family is being viciously attacked by a bitter, decaying old man. He stopped pacing and he pointed a sharp, highly manicured finger directly at my simple, dark suit. "Marcus is a retired, exhausted city worker." Vance continued, lowering his tone to sound incredibly tragic. "He has lived a very long, very hard life, but he has absolutely nothing left to his name. My client Andre, out of the pure goodness of his heart, allowed this struggling old man to live entirely rent-free inside their beautiful family home." I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the chair right next to me. Maya was sitting perfectly still, but her dark eyes were glowing with a cold, lethal anticipation. She loved it when arrogant men built their entire argument on a completely rotten foundation. Just 3 nights ago, Vance said, holding up his empty hands to the state mediator, Marcus purchased a simple $2 lottery ticket. He brought that exact ticket home and he handed it directly to his lovely daughter Kendra as a permanent loving blessing for her new marriage. He explicitly told her that he wanted them to have a beautiful, wealthy future. It was a legally binding, completely undisputed oral gift. Andre nodded his head vigorously, sitting right next to his lawyer, and he wiped a completely fake tear from his pale, sweating cheek. He was playing the role of the exhausted, victimized son to absolute perfection. But the very second that tiny piece of paper actually hit the $95 million jackpot, Vance shouted, raising his voice to fill the massive glass room,